All right, we're going to pick up notes, and hopefully this will be the last video for the notes on China with the spread of Confucian ideas. Followers of Confucius, about 3 centuries after his death, as I briefly discussed in the last video, started spreading his ideas, again, from his writings, the Analects. Now, 2 of them were Menicus, circa 370 to 300 BCE, and then another follower, Shunzu, about 310 to 215 BCE. Again, lived to be mighty old, that one. Menicus, like Confucius, traveled around offering advice to various other states. Over and over, he tried to convert them to the view that the ruler been able to win over the people through benevolent government. Right? Be kind, be a just ruler. All of that sounds vaguely familiar. It should, from the mandate of heaven. Menicus proposed concrete political, financial measures to ease tax burdens and otherwise improve people's lot. So again, trying to be a just ruler, Menicus is advocating, hey, part of the mandate of heaven might be to improve the lives of your people. We should do that through improving the tax system. Not a bad thought, right? Well, excuse me. In one conversation with the king of Qi, he asked if it was true that the founder of, he being the king of Qi, asked if the founder of the Zhou dynasty had taken up arms against the last king of Shang. Menicus replied that that's what history said, right? I mean, that's how it was recorded. The king of Qi then asked whether it was allowed, permissible, for a subject to assassinate his lord. Well, Menicus basically replied that if the shoe fits, wear it. In that response, if the king was unkind, if he was unjust, then yes, he should have been assassinated because the mandate of heaven says that you should rule as a just lord. Not entirely sure that got Menicus a whole lot of good responses when he answers, a ruler that way. Do you believe the people have the power to overthrow the ruler? Well, under the right circumstances, would say Menicus. Menicus conveyed his view of human nature with metaphors from nature and the environment around. I'll let y'all read the one that's in the textbook if you'd care to. Shunzi, about 50 years later, took the opposite view of human nature than Menicus, arguing that people are born, unlike we had discussed earlier, they were born good and would save the baby on the lip of the well. Shunzi argued that people were born selfish and that only through education and ritual do they learn how to better live their lives. Much of what is desirable is not inborn, but is taught. So, we'll see this coming around in Enlightenment thinking. Later on, you have the concept of tabula rasa, or the blank slate. Are we born with anything, are we good or evil inherently when we're born? Well, this argument goes all the way back. So, neither Confucius nor Menicus had much political or administrative experience. Junzi, on the other hand, had worked for many years in the court of his home. So, he did have a little more success in spreading his ideas and Confucian-based ideas to the rulers. He had already operated in court. He knew that, unlike Menicus, you probably shouldn't tell a ruler that it would be advisable for his people to overthrow him if he is not a kind ruler. Junzi definitely, I think, had a better idea than that. No small part due because he, existed in the court system before this. He had already spoken with kings. Junzi was also a more rigorous thinker than his predecessors and developed philosophical foundations of many ideas that were merely, outlined by Confucius. Confucius was very, concept-driven. Menicus sharpened the concept. Junzi brought it to fruition. Although he did not think gods were, responsible for anything in particular, he did agree that rituals gave a purpose to life, and that purpose gave people happiness, gave them a better life. So he did have, a positive view on ancestor worship, on spirit worship. Excuse me. Junzi compared and contrasted ritual music. Music shapes people's emotions, creates feelings of solidarity, while ritual shapes people's sense of duty, creates social differentiation. So, Very deep thinker, him. The Confucian vision of personal ethics and public service found a small but ardent following during the wartime, warring states period. So, in a nutshell, these ideas appealed to some but not all, and those that agreed with them understood them and followed them wholeheartedly. Sorry, needed that sip of coffee. Keep thinking I'm about to start coughing and I never do, but it stops the video for a moment. I apologize. Hmm. Go to our next page. Let's go ahead and start touching on Taoism, legalism, and the other schools of thought. How did the teachings of Taoism, legalism, and other schools of thought differ from Confucianism? Well, during the Warring States period, when you had that small group that followed the Confucian thinking, especially under Menicus and Junzi, rulers took advantage of the destruction of states to recruit newly unemployed men to their service as advisors and assistants. So, you know, a chief would go and conquer with his army the surrounding kingdoms, small states, and you would then have a lot of unemployed people in those small states. Oh, you mean your way of life is completely upside down and overturned? Tell you what, said the Chinese rulers, why don't you come and work for me? We'll make a bigger and better state together. It's appealing offer for many of these small states that were overtaken. So, at this time, lively debate followed. Again, you have numerous religions and philosophies competing for space in the same time, relatively speaking. So, of course, with these conquered states come the ideas that had grown in them, and when they become part of larger states, those smaller states, the voices within them, become voices in the larger states, spreading ideas, right? Again, common part of history. Taoism, in a nutshell, Confucius and his followers believed in moral action. They thought men of virtue should devote themselves to making the government work for the benefit of the people. Those who became labeled Taoist disagreed. They were striving to make no thing better than it generally was. If you don't interfere, it becomes no better, no worse. Tao, or the way, simply states, or Taoism simply states, that rather than making human beings, human actions, the center of concern, why not focus on the bigger things, or the Tao, the way that things happen, or why they happen the way that they happen? Each Taoist learned from two books, rather, Lao Tzu and Shuangzi, both dating back to the 3rd century BCE, or Lao Tzu, excuse me. In the philosophy laid out by Lao Tzu, the people would be better off if they knew less, gave up tools, renounced writing, and stopped everything. No interactions with your neighbors, no nothing, and went back to a very pure way of life. This would avoid war, would avoid the strife that comes with modernized worlds, even what China at this point would understand as a modernized world. And all of that warfare resulted in Taoist going, you know what, all of this violence is bad for China. It would be better if we were all just, in a much more simpler time, right? Just go back to the basics, go back to the way. Well, appealed to some, not to all. Similarly, Zhuangzi, again, 369 to 286 BCE, the author of a book that many Taoists used to follow, filled in with parables, flights of fancy, and fictional encounters between historical figures, including Confucius and his disciples. So this book was more of a thought experiment. What if I met this person? How would I debate against what he would debate? Well, again, philosophical in nature and very, influential in its own time. One parable of the wheelwright instantly tell. This is one of the Taoist parables, I should mention beforehand. One parable, a wheelwright instantly tells a duke that books are useless because they all contain the dregs of long dead men. So, ideas that were recorded by people that have long since been dead. The duke, offended, threatens to kill this man unless he explains himself. Why do you say these things? He wonders. Wheelwright responds by arguing that truly skilled craftsmen respond instantaneously to what they are needed to fix. They don't go back and think, what did my training teach me to do in those books? They respond by gut instinct because they are trained to do that. It's their natural skill set. The Taoist would argue Taoism can be seen as a response to Confucianism, a rejection of many of its basic premises. Nevertheless, over the course of Chinese history, many people felt the pull of both these ideas and both schools of thought. Taoism is also thought to have inspired a love of nature and natural scenery. And again, that is something that we still see commonly portrayed in both art and pastimes in a lot of Chinese, Asian cultures in general. You see a great respect for the outdoors and the love of nature and being part of it. Something that, as an American, I truly appreciate. I'm a bit of a nature person myself. No Taoism attached to it, but I do love nature. Either way, on to the next and final section, legalism. Over the course of the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, remember they go backwards in that capacity, one smaller state after another was conquered. Now, again, I've already mentioned this resulted in a look towards Confucianism, a look towards Taoism. Legalism would follow. In these theories, because there was an emphasis on the need for rigorous laws, argued a strong government. So again, a little bit stronger than Taoist or Confucianism would seek out. You needed a more tyrannical government, not tyrannical in a bad sense, but you needed a government that had laws for everything. Legalism, legalism, laws go together hand in hand. Lost my place in my notes. I apologize. So, legalism, though eventually discredited, laid the basis for Chinese, bureaucratic systems of government. I've mentioned that they started in the Shang dynasty, or rather in the Zhou dynasty, developing more bureaucratic forms of government. Well, legalism appealed to a very specific set of people, and those people were typically bureaucrats. Especially in one person, I'm not going to test y'all on this, so you know what? We're just going to sum legalism up a little bit, and rulers of several states adopted legalism as their way of thinking, but only the state of Qin systematically followed it. Very briefly, but very successfully. We'll discuss it in a later chapter, but the Qin, kingdom, small state, kingdom, adopted the legalist way of thinking, and it didn't last very long. So maybe that speaks to it on a different level. I don't know, but you can't rule everything by dictative law, in my opinion. It just doesn't work. Legalism makes the argument that that is the best way for Chinese society to exist, is under a set of very strict laws and a very strict government that enforces those laws. As history has dictated and showed us that that did not work especially well in the Qin region. So, on to the last section of notes, the workings of nature. Again, Taoism, Confucianism, many of the other philosophies of this time encourage a heavy appreciation of nature and finding man's balance in everything, and that means understanding nature at a certain level. The key idea to develop the natural philosophers was the concept of yin and yang, first described in a manual called the Book of Changes, around 900 BCE. So again, you have Book of Documents, Book of Songs, Book of Changes. This developed into a much more elaborate theory by the late Zhou period. The yin is the feminine, dark, receptive, yielding, negative, and weak. Yang is the masculine, bright, assertive, creative, positive, and strong. Yin and yang are complementary poles rather than distinct entities or opposing forces. The movement of yin and yang accounts for the transition from day to night and from summer to winter, and these models, based on observation of nature, were extended to explain not only phenomena we might classify as natural, such as illness, storms, and earthquakes, but also social phenomena, such as the rise and fall of states, conflicts in families, and all these realms. Unwanted things happen when the balance between yin and yang is disturbed. So again, it's all about balance in Chinese philosophy, right? I read that directly from the textbook. I think it's a great description of the concepts of yin and yang as it is applied in the Chinese philosophies and its understanding and workings within nature and balancing man and nature's role together. Either way, I believe we discussed yin and yang extensively in class. You can't have all of the dark. There's the balance is a small spot of light. Then you can't have all of the light at once. There's a small spot of dark within it. And They are constantly in movement, balancing with one another, never out of balance as it is. So, very important feature in both philosophy and religion and just general outlook of life in this time in China. So, the next bit is your chapter summary in your textbook. I'm going to let you all read that because, again, I hear my son crying in the background. Again, I hope all four of these videos have been very helpful. For those of you that watch them before the test is due, please remember to check your assignments. There is a test that will post Tuesday. Good luck.